Hello, I'm Billy Stewart, Assistant Pastor here at Solid Rock Tabernacle, 1325 Rudy Road in Alma, Arkansas. I want to welcome you to the broadcast and extend this personal invitation to you to come and join us in one of our exciting Spirit-filled services. Our Sunday school begins at 9 a.m. Our Sunday morning worship begins at 10 a.m. Our Sunday evening worship begins at 6 p.m. And we have an exciting Wednesday evening Bible study that begins at 7 p.m. We are taking a journey through the Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Join us, won't you? Solid Rock Tabernacle, 1325 Rudy Road in Alma, Arkansas. It's church the way that it should be. Hey, I'll save a seat just for you. And now, let's join our service already in progress.
You from fishtailing around. Yep. Well, we were here last Wednesday, right? Yeah, we just missed one day. We just missed Sunday. All right, anybody remember where we were at last week? Where we left off at?
The Festival of Trumpets.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And I just thought of something. We did not finish all of the festivals, did we? No. Okay. I said we would finish the festivals this week, and when I was putting this together, I forgot all about that. So I don't have. We'll get the festivals. We'll go back and pick up the festivals next week. I'll pick up where I left off because I didn't even think anything about it and forgot all about it until just now when y'all started talking about the festivals. I said, oh yeah, there was still 4 more we had to go through, but that's okay. Huh? Yeah. So at least some of y'all, see, I didn't think any of y'all would remember actually what it was. I didn't think anybody would remember where we left off, so it didn't matter. No, I knew that.
Yeah, they're kind of just.
We all got photographic memories.
Yeah.
We all,
But this one that we're going to do today, it's Leviticus 20 or 25. But it's real interesting when we get into 25 to see something that goes right along with a end times prophecy. So when we get there, I think you'll like it. I think you'll be interested in it. But let's go into Leviticus 24 first. Verses 1 to 4. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel that they bring unto thee pure oil, olive beaten for the night, to cause the lamps to burn continually. Without the veil of the testimony, in the tabernacle of the congregation, shall Aaron order it from the evening unto the morning before the Lord continually. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. He shall order the lamps upon the pure candlesticks before the Lord continually. So the lamp, you remember the lamps in the tabernacle? Okay? It was basically the menorah, the 7, okay? It was a solid gold lampstand, and we talked about it in Exodus 25, verses 31 to 40. And it was the only source of light in the tabernacle. There was no other source of light in the tabernacle. That was it. Was just that candlestand, that lampstand. So that lampstand had to be continually cared for because the light had to be continually going all the time. So it had to be supplied with pure olive oil in order for it to keep burning. The wicks had to be trimmed in order for it to keep burning because it's, I don't know, most of y'all probably don't remember, but some of us older folks do when the back in the day when we all had those oil lamps. Anybody have those old coal oil lamps? Yeah. Turn them on, and you had to keep cutting the wick down on that thing because it would burn so much. So you had to trim the wick in order to get any light. And that's what had to happen on this. So the care they did, supplying the oil, trimming the wicks, it made the lamps burn continually. And the pure, one of the enduring images representing Israel and the Jewish people. Still does that today. Okay? When you think of the Jewish people, there's two things that most people think of. They think of the Star of David, of course. Okay? And then they think of the menorah, which is the lampstand. All right? So the lampstand in the temple at the time of Jesus, there was the lampstand in the temple, because the tabernacle, if you remember, was just the portable temple, so to speak. The temple was set up basically the same way. And it was captured by the Roman soldiers under the command of Titus. And that happened in AD 70 when Jerusalem fell, and they had the rebellion, and Jerusalem fell to destroyed, and all the stuff in the temple was taken out. But an image of that lampstand was carved in the ark of this in the city of Rome, and it was made there. Huh? Yes, Titus was one of the Caesars, the kings of Rome. Okay. And the image of the lampstand is also found in other ancient carvings and coins and different things like that. But it was important that the light from the oil lamps shined continually. It had to keep going all the time. And God didn't want his tabernacle to be left in darkness. He always wanted there to be light in the tabernacle. Okay? That continual light of the tabernacle, okay, that pointed to the coming Messiah. In other words, it pointed to Jesus. Jesus never stopped being the light of the world. And there is also a sense in which light points to the people of God as well. Because we are supposed to be continually shining lights. Light in the darkness of the world. Shining our light. So we, in order to do that, we have to build and our wicks trimmed and all of that stuff. Okay? So verses 5 to 9. And thou shalt take fine flour and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2/10 deals shall be in one cake. And thou shalt set them in 2 rows, 6 on a row, upon the pure table before the Lord. And thou shalt put pure frankincense upon each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Every Sabbath he shall set in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. And it shall be Aaron's and his sons, and they shall eat it in the holy place, for it is most holy unto him, of the offerings of the Lord, made by fire, by a perpetual statute. So the 12 cakes of bread, right? They were arranged in 2 rows, very orderly, 2 rows of 6 each side. And they stood, if you remember, they stood opposite of the golden lampstand. The golden lampstand was on one side, and the table for the showbread was on the other. And they were equally divided into 2 rows. Okay? 2 rows of 6, which would be how many for all you mathematicians? 12, yes, for 12, okay? And what did it do? Why 12? Why 12 cakes? To represent the 12 tribes of Israel in the presence of the Lord and in his tabernacle. Now, this is the bread called the showbread in Exodus 25:30, right? When you look at the meaning of showbread, when you go back to the Hebrew and the meaning of showbread, it literally means bread of the face. Okay? Bread of the face. This is the bread that was associated with the presence of God. And Aaron And the priests were supposed to eat the bread. But they ate the bread in the presence of God, which was a mark of friendship and fellowship with God. And the 12 came in fellowship of the people of God had with their God. So the two aspects of this were a symbol of God's desired relationship with his people, that God wants a proper and ordered relationship with his people. God doesn't want a haphazard relationship with us. Anybody ever had a haphazard relationship with anybody? Yeah. You know, kind of maybe on again, off again. It's just, you know, you got a friend that maybe you see him, maybe you don't. It's one of those type of things. Hey, it's just haphazard. You never know whether you're going to see them. You never know when they're going to show up. God doesn't want that. God wants a good, ordered relationship. He wants a relationship that's, you know, everything's in line, everything's lined up, which is the way we want our relationships, everything to be lined up and in a row, all of our ducks in a row. We want to have a linear waterfowl situation going on. In other words, I always point to the Jeep on my dashboard. Said, Mom's always getting in and saying something about my ducks. I said, well, I got all my ducks in a row, so.
That's why you drive a Jeep, man.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I got two friends that, how many years ago? 50 or 55 years I've had forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like me and Brother Gilmore, we always had a connection. I worked for him and all that, but I've got two friends 50-something years, and I'm 64, so I've known them almost my whole life. And one of them stole my car. I had to chase him down, and he thought I was going to whoop him. It was funny. And so, but if you treat people right, this is what I'm getting at. I ain't trying to go about that.
No, you're fine.
If you treat people right like you're preaching about, that's so good. I like what you're doing. If you do that, you can reach people for the church.
Yep.
Because you're being a friend that a lot of people won't do, and that's what I've been doing. That's how it's working. And everybody's got their different way, Pastor, that we have to do to build a church.
Mm-hmm.
And you know as well as I do, I'm talking with Gilmore, even though I got my own church, I'm going to help this church.
Right.
Because this is my church. I love it. And so in order to do that, we have to do what I'm saying here. And, you know, you can't just let people come and forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and y'all don't do that. That's why I like this church.
Yeah. But God wants that proper, ordered relationship with his people. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is that God wants a continual, unbroken relationship with his people. God doesn't want us to be on again. He doesn't want us to be, well, I'll go to church for a couple of weeks and then, oh, well, okay, I feel better now, so I won't go to church until I start feeling bad again, and then I'll start going back to church. You know, it's the only time I start going to church, and the only time that I want to have a relationship with God is when things are going bad, and you know I need some comfort of some sort, so I'll start going back to church. Okay? But when everything's fine, then it's well, I don't need that. Okay? And that's not what God wants. God wants that continual relationship, good, bad, or otherwise. Yes, sir. Yeah, a lot of relationships anywhere. You know, you get a lot. That's where they get the fair weather friends. That your friends are only great. As soon as they're gone. As soon as you ask them to help you move, they run off. And they really run off when you ask them to move a body. Well, that's not, you know. But it's you know, you want those people that are always going to be there no matter what. Yes.
It's like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and all of a sudden the friends couldn't show up. But ultimately, this was made possible by the person and the work of Jesus the Messiah. When we have Jesus and when we follow Jesus as Messiah, then we have that relationship with God. We have that continual relationship with God. And we can eat that bread, the showbread, just like the priest did in that time. Why? Because Jesus is the bread of life. Okay? So the bread was not only for display in a ritual, but God wanted the people of God to actually receive joy and be nourished by the bread. That symbolized their relationship and their fellowship with God. Now, significantly, God wanted the fellowship fresh. He wanted a fresh fellowship with his people. If you remember when we read on that, the bread was replaced. How often was the bread replaced? Every Sabbath, right? So the bread was replaced every Sabbath. Stale communion with his people. He didn't want it to be, stale bread. You leave bread out for 7 days, it's going to get stale. It's going to be hard. God doesn't want a stale relationship with his people. He wants a fresh, renewed relationship, constantly being renewed. All right? Huh? Eating rocks, okay?
If you went to Walmart or anywhere and bought bread, a lot of times you get it, it's barely fresh. And you heard me preach on that, Pastor, about, having a fresh relationship.
Yeah.
That's what we got to do. And a lot of churches, a lot of people don't do that, and they don't have that fresh relationship. That's why they don't stay. That's why they don't stay in there. But when you get it as fresh manna from heaven, it is good. You know what I mean? Like fresh homemade bread is the best.
Yeah.
And you put that butter on it, or banana bread, anything you make, it's unbelievable.
Yep.
If it's old, I ain't eating it.
Yeah.
That's the way the church is. They need to be fed the best of the best from God.
That's right. That's right. All right, let's look at verses 10 to 12. And the son of an Israelitish woman, that means she's kind of Israeli. The son of an Israelitish woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the children of Israel. And this son and a man of Israel strove. Son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed. And they brought him unto Moses, and his mother's name Shelomith, and the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan, and they put him in ward that the mind of the Lord might be showed them. So this man was basically, he was half Egyptian, half Egyptian, half Hebrew. All right? So he was part of the mixed multitude that came. If you remember back in Exodus 12:38, there was a mixed multitude that went out with Israel, out of Egypt with Israel. These were the Egyptians that were marrying the Israelites. Okay? And the man committed the crime of blasphemy. Now, what is blasphemy? Blasphemy is basically to attack someone, especially God, with your words. Not with your fists, not with your hands, with your words. Okay? It's somewhat, we could equate it to the modern way of equating it would be verbal abuse. Someone who verbally abuses somebody else, all right? But this verbal abuse is especially directed towards God. Yes?
And some people today, if you just speak one word to them, they'll go
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, why are you talking to me like that? Yeah.
Well, they don't like you in the first place, right?
That's true.
And they act like they're your friend, but they're not. And when and that's like with the Holy Ghost, you know who God is. You really, Jesus inside you. Everything about you is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The Holy Ghost. Then you come back and say, you got spoken tongues, you got the Holy Ghost. Then you said, I don't believe in that. That's what I think blasphemy is. Is that right, Pastor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know, but I'm saying on this, I've seen a woman do this one time. I'm not getting that. I'm sorry. But you got to be real. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, you're fine. When you get, well, you know, and that's part of it. But when you do something like a lot of people do it, they use the GD. That's blasphemy. Okay. When you say, and I'm sorry, and I know Brother Gilmore has said this before too, but people will get up there and go like, "Oh my God," you know, like that. That's blasphemy. Okay. Yeah. So, you know, you got to be real careful because you got to be careful what you say. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about this because the Hebrews, the Israelites, were very, very, very strict on this. All right? And they had ways to make sure that they didn't do that. So the command against blasphemy was given, of course, in Exodus 22:28. And it seems that it was common for Egyptians to curse their gods, to badmouth their gods all the time. Okay? So the root of this man's sin was that he considered the God of Israel to be the same as the Egyptian gods. Okay? And the people of Israel were wise in leaving this to the proper workings of justice in the mind of the Lord. You know, instead of them rushing out and just grabbing the guy and just, you blasphemy, and take him out and throw rocks at him, right? Which stoning to death was the punishment for that. But this wasn't a mob that did it. They didn't all rush up and grab him. This was working, they weren't working outside of the process of law. Even though this was a sin against God and it was a crime against God, they still had a process of law that they had to follow. You see, the issue was unclear because the man was a foreigner. And the laws of Israel were not necessarily applied to foreigners as well as the Israelites. So the question was, does the law against blasphemy apply the same against a foreigner as it does against an Israelite?
Does that mean that they don't know any better?
He don't know any better on it. So, okay.
The teaching moment to explain the seriousness of that.
And that is, you know, and that's what something that we do too. You know, when people get up and they start saying that, and you say, "Hey, I would prefer you not do that," and everything. I was when I was working at Gerber, we were sitting outside on break and everything, and there were some people because cereal was close to maintenance, and they came and had the same break area as we did. And we were sitting there one night. I worked in the night shift, and we were sitting there talking. Some guy, GD this, GD this. And another guy looked over him and he says, "You know that guy's a preacher over there, don't you?" And he goes, "I am so sorry. Please forgive me." I said, "Why? It wasn't my name you blasphemed." You know, you need to be asking God's forgiveness, not mine. Okay, you didn't take my name in vain. You took His name in vain. So that's it. You know, you need to ask forgiveness from the right person.
I had a best girlfriend, and she was saying the GD, and I told her, I was like, what if each time I got frustrated or really upset, I just blurted out your mom's name that way? I was like, how would that make you feel? I was like, that would hurt your feelings. That's your mom. I was like, this is our God. Like, he's like my dad or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. Don't do that anymore. Okay?
Hey, Pastor, but we have to learn how to act
I
in
started
church
saying
or
it.
act every day of our life.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of people, they say they're Christians, and you go around them, you can't stand them.
Yeah.
They got the wrong spirit in them. But you got the one that's doing right, like y'all do here together, and the church is growing, you can see it. When you see that, you know you're getting ready to move. It's
Mhm.
going to happen.
Yep.
But we have to do it together.
Yep, that's right. But it's see they just but the again getting back this the question was, does this law of blasphemy, does it apply to the foreigner as well as to us? You see, the law of Moses protected the foreigner in Exodus 23 and 9. But they needed guidance to understand to what extent the laws of Israel applied to foreigners that were among them. So that's why they took the guy and put him in the ward, it said. All right? Verses 13 and 14. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Bring forth him that hath cursed without the camp, and let all that heard him lay their hands upon his head, and let all the congregation stone him. Okay? So God's saying, yeah, it applied to him. But this was done in accord with a principle. And later we'll see this, it's specifically stated in Deuteronomy 17, 6 and 7. It says, 2 or 3 of the witnesses publicly had to lay their hands on the accused. Okay? This was a sign of a sure testimony of his guilt. This also meant that the guilty man knew who his accusers were and could not be condemned by secret accusers. And if you remember, we talked about before, the persons that made the accusations had to be willing to lay their hands on them, number one, but they had to be willing, if it was a sentence of death, especially death by stoning, they had to be the one to be willing to cast the first stone. So in other words, if you accuse somebody, you better know that what you're accusing them of is what they did. Because they said, okay, you're accusing him of that. Guess what? Yeah, we're all going to stone this guy. But you get the honors of throwing out the first pitch. Right? You do.
Their blood is on your hands.
Yeah, you have to start it out. Okay? So the accusation had to be established as true. And Deuteronomy 19, 16 to 19 says that a false witness was to suffer the same punishment would be given to the one against whom he had made the accusation. So if you give false testimony against somebody and they find out that you gave false testimony, then you're the one that got the punishment that this guy was supposed to get. Okay? Nowadays, they just say, oh, no, that's perjury, and they might slap you on the wrist. No, people wouldn't. How much perjury would you get if you knew that if you got caught in perjury, that you got sentenced to the same prison sentence that that guy was going to get sentenced to, or that person was going to get sentenced to? Yeah, these people, you're not going to false. You're going to, when you say something, you better mean it, okay? Now, God commanded execution by stoning for several reasons. First, there were a lot of stones out there. It wasn't like they had to go and get swords and make swords and do anything else. There were stones everywhere, easy to find, okay? But most importantly, it was so that the community could participate in the execution. All right? In other words, the community got a part of it. And this was a strong way of saying that this person had not only sinned against God, but they had sinned against the community as well. Okay? So therefore, the law applied to a foreigner. All right. Verses 15 to 16. And thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, saying, Whosoever curseth his God shall bear his sin. The name of the Lord, he shall surely be put to death, and all the congregation shall certainly stone him, as well the stranger as he that is born in the land. when he blasphemeth the name of the Lord shall be put to death. So this was to say that the person who publicly curses God bears responsibility for the. In other words, it's not somebody else's fault. If you got out there and you started blaspheming God, cursing God, it ain't somebody else's fault. Oh, well, there was years ago, most of y'all probably don't remember it, but years ago there was a comedian named Flip Wilson. Anybody remember Flip Wilson? Flip Wilson, one of his big sayings was, "The devil made me do it." Okay? Yeah. No, the devil didn't make you do it. You did it. Okay? The devil might have tempted you to do it, but you did it because you wanted to do it.
I'm holding to that. When I did make my mistakes in life, the devil made me do it. I didn't do it. I'm going to stick with that. Got right, you don't, who made you do it then?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's we are all responsible for our actions. The devil can never tempt you to do something that you weren't willing to do. There's always the free will. Anybody ever drove by a bank? Anybody ever been tempted to go rob a bank? Okay. Why? Has anybody ever thought as you're driving by, man, I wish I had the money in that bank? Everybody drove by and said, man, I'd like to have money in that bank, but nobody goes in there and takes the money. Why? The devil may say, hey, yeah, go ahead and go rob that bank. But unless you're willing to do it, you ain't going to do it. Okay? So, as the example of the Egyptian blasphemer proved, this was a severe judgment for what was considered a very, very serious crime. Taking care not to blaspheme the name of the Lord, some Jewish people created traditions that took a lot of care to avoid saying or even writing the name of God. They would not even say the name of God. They would not write the name of God. The thought was this: if no one ever said or wrote the name of God, then you can never blaspheme God's name because you never say it. Now, by some accounts, only the Jewish high priest was allowed to actually pronounce the holy name of God, Yahweh. And he was only allowed to do it once a year. You know when what day that was? The Day of Atonement. Yes. Eh? Now, some said the proper pronunciation of the name, because the tetragrammaton of the name is YHWH. Okay? And some people said the proper pronunciation of the name of God would be passed on from the high priest to his successor with his last breath. The last thing the guy ever said was telling his successor how to pronounce the name of God. Hey.
I've kind of heard that it sounds like the proper way that it sounds like a breath, like you're not really pronouncing the vowels.
Well,
YH,
in Hebrew, there's really not, there are vowels, but there's not, it's not getting too in-depth into the Hebrew. But when you see Hebrew most of the time written, especially in ancient Hebrews, there really wasn't any there weren't any vowels there. So the pronunciation, a lot of different confusions for a lot of years about the pronunciation of the tetragrammaton YHWH. Okay? Now, the letters have been pronounced differently over the years. Some people, I'm sure you've heard it, some people have pronounced it and mistakenly pronounced it as Jehovah. All right? So you get the Jehovah Witnesses, and people say Jehovah instead of Yahweh, which is the pronunciation of it. Okay? And many religiously observant Jewish people, even today, would also not even write the name of God. They wouldn't even write it on a piece of paper, because they believed that if the paper were destroyed in some way, it might be considered blasphemy or taking the Lord's name. Instead of writing Yahweh, they would write Adonai, which means Lord. Okay? So they would use Adonai, which means Lord, instead of Yahweh. And instead of writing God, and you'll see this a lot of times now, if you will look at some Hebrew texts that have been translated into English, okay, they will have, instead of writing Yahweh out, they will write the Tetragrammaton, the YHWH, in capital letters there, right? But instead of God, instead of putting God in there, they will put G-D. Instead of spelling God, they would put it to where it's not completely there, okay? And they would refer to God with names like, instead of saying God or saying Yahweh or Adonai or anything like that, they would refer to him as the name instead of saying God. So they would call him the name. They would say I am. They would say anything but Yahweh. All right? All right, 17:18. And he that killeth any man shall surely be put to death, and he that killeth a beast shall make it good, beast for beast. So in the context of giving the penalty for the Egyptian blasphemer, God stated a fundamental principle of his justice, which is crimes must be punished. But they had to be punished in the proportion appropriate to the crime. In other words, you don't want to have the death penalty for parking violations. All right? You don't want to get sentenced to life in prison for speeding. It would cut speeding down, I'm sure, but that's not proportionate to the crime. So God's saying, yes, crimes have to be punished, but the punishment needs to fit the crime, needs to be proportional with the crime. Well, yeah, then that's different. But when an animal belonging to another person was killed without permission, restitution was required. You had to pay for it. You had to either replace that animal or pay for it. Okay? Value and dignity. Who wrongly killed an animal was not a murderer and did not have to die because they killed the animal. They just had to make restitution, replace it. Okay? So this shows the difference between human life and animal life. If you try to kill one of my cats, though, you try to kill one of my cats, that will be the death penalty. All right? All right. Verses 19 to 22. And if a man causeth a blemish in his neighbor, as he had done, so shall it be done to him. Breach for breach, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he hath caused a blemish in a man, so it shall be done to him again. And he that killeth a beast, he shall restore it. And he that killeth a man, he shall be put to death. Ye shall have one manner of law, as well for the stranger as for one of your own country, for I am the Lord your God. So this is the fundamental, yes.
So basically, anything that happened to one person, it would be person that committed it.
Yes. In theory, okay? Let me get into a little bit more, okay? This is the fundamental principle of the punishment. According to measure, the principle was the same law for the stranger and the one in their own country, okay? So God didn't give the Israelite an unfair advantage over anything. Okay? And he didn't give him an unfair advantage over a foreigner in terms of the law. Now, many people have taken an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. All right? But this was God setting a limit, is what it was. All right? He says, if you put somebody's eye out, the most you can do to that person is put their eye out. That doesn't mean you have to put their eye out, but that's the most you can do. Okay? So a man or a judge would not set just whatever they pleased. Okay? It wasn't one of those things to where, oh, well, you knock this guy's tooth out, we're going to break your jaw. And somebody else comes up, you knock the guy's tooth out, well, we're going to knock your tooth out too. Okay? So the judge wasn't just able to arbitrarily assign punishment based on who he liked and didn't like or anything else. Yes?
That's kind of like, when I got attacked, and I didn't fight back, and they hit me and stuff, and all the stuff that happened to me, it was the devil, And my old days, don't get me what I've done. I didn't do that. But I still got embarrassed. I still got, Jesus got that way too, didn't he? He had to go through things that weren't even his. And, I didn't understand it. I said, God, I didn't do that to this guy. I mean, he was like that. I don't have any tires for him, right?
Yeah.
When he attacked me, I knew I could run, and she protected me. That tells you that. and that's God, because he kept me calm. But they put me in jail, and I didn't even do nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You remember, Pastor? Yeah. So in life, that's the way it is with church. You do something, and people like saying what they want to say, and pop up in church, and then it splits the church. And it happens all the time. Mm-hmm. As much as I evangelize, I see that, Pastor. And we can't do that. Everybody thinks you can just say what you want to people. You're going to make somebody mad because people's in the flesh. Mm-hmm. When you're in the spirit, you got to do it different. I don't care how you was raised, how mean you was or not. You got to do it different, don't you, Pastor? Is that right?
Yep. Yep. Okay. So the law did not mean that the eye of an offender literally be gouged out of the person's head, okay, if he took the eye of another person, which is basically that's poke it out. Okay? Now, the law of Moses had a system of financial restitution in cases, right? For example, if a slave loses an eye, to take it literal, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that means that if the slave lost the eye, then the master needs to lose it. But an eye of the person responsible was not to be plucked out because the slave lost an eye. What happened is the slave gained his freedom, was let go. So it was more of a financial compensation. They're either to be too lenient, we tend to be too lenient in what we do, or we tend to be too severe in what we do. Okay? You get a lot of people that they'll have anything, that people can do anything to them and they won't say a word, they won't do anything, and that's just, they let it go. Okay? Then you have other people that you say one thing to them and they're fighting you. We're either too lenient in what we do or we're too severe in what we do. But God had it set up is to have it a happy medium. God both required that crime be punishment, and he set an appropriate limit to the punishment. Jesus rightly rightly condemned the taking of this commandment regarding the law and order of the community and applying it to personal relationships where love, going the extra mile, should be the rule. If your husband yells at you, that doesn't mean that you should yell back. If your wife yells at you, doesn't mean that you should yell back. Hey, it should be love, okay? It should not be equal retribution for a person. Okay. And Moses spake to the children of Israel that they should bring forth him that had cursed out of the camp and stone him with stones, and the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. So we're not told how Moses felt about this. His job was to be the messenger, his own personal feelings and his own. But this verse is important. Not given to Israel for interesting facts or mere guidelines. God expected people to obey them. And here, they obeyed it, even if it was difficult. Okay? Now that takes us to the end of 24. We're going to get into 25. We got a little bit of time. We're going to get into 25, and this is going to be really, really interesting, I think, for you. Because when we get into verse 25, this sets a foundation. Yeah. Did I say verse 25? Okay. When we get into chapter 25, this sets a foundation for us. It sets a foundation for when we get farther along into primarily Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. Yes.
You know, ain't trying to interrupt this. I think it's pretty good. When you're trying to do something with the Lord, and Brother Gilmore knows me real well, and I know him real well. And you know, like we met that time, remember I told you, where he was there at the same time. Timing is everything, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Be in agreement with people or your church or God. You've got to follow the lead of the Lord. If you don't follow the lead of the Lord like Brother Gilmore does, he taught me a lot about that. I do the same thing now. And then I see people that it works. In order to build a church, no matter where it is, you got to be in agreement. You got to follow the Spirit. And Brother Gilmore is very, very good. And you see him the day he prophesied on me about being an evangelist. I have more than one gift, but that's my main call, and I know that. Mm-hmm. But he saw that in me. He approved me for that. You know what I mean? And that's what we have to do as a church. And I'm sitting there watching these boys here. They're growing. I'm amazed things they say. Mm-hmm. And the way you're teaching, Pastor, you're doing so good. That's why I've been coming. I've been listening to you. And, you know, we got to pay attention to things like that. You know, like I said, sometimes I make a mistake on things, but there's times when you know that you're timing right, Pastor. You know that you are going forward in God as a team, as a church. And when that starts to happen, this church is going to boom. Mm-hmm. The devil's trying to stop it, but he can't stop it.
That's right. That's right. But when we get into chapter 25, this is I love end times prophecy. Okay, I love it. My doctoral thesis was on it. So I love end times prophecy. I love eschatology. But you can't just study Revelation. When we went through Revelation, if you remember, when we went through Revelation, we spent a lot of time in Daniel before we even got into Revelation. To spend time in Daniel, you got to spend time in Ezekiel, you got to spend time in Jeremiah, you got to spend time in Joel, you got to spend time in Matthew, you got to spend time in a lot of books. Just reading Revelation is not going to give you everything that you need to know. And here in Leviticus, we're going to see a foundation that is going to be laid later on in Jeremiah and in Daniel. So let's get into it and look at it. I think you're going to find it interesting because it just fascinates me. And the Lord spoke to Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when ye come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. Now, before I go any further, I want to point something out. Notice he says, when you come into the land. He doesn't say if you come into the land. He says when you come into the land. This is another reaffirmation of the promise that he's given that they're going to come into the land. So these laws were given in faith. And Israel, if you remember, we're still in the wilderness at this time. They weren't in the promised land yet. And additionally, as far as Moses and the people knew, they were only a matter of months away from entering into the promised land. And if they hadn't messed up, they probably would have been in just a matter of months. Instead, they had to wander around for 40 years. Okay? But this reminds us that Israel is still camped at Mount Sinai. We've been going through all of this, and you would think that, oh, well, they've moved on to different places. No, they're still at Mount Sinai. When Moses went up and got the 10 Commandments and they did the golden calf and they built the tabernacle, they're still there. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still right there. Okay? Israel remained at Mount Sinai. If we look back to Exodus 19, that's when Israel came into Mount Sinai. All right? They stayed there all through Leviticus. So as we're going through Leviticus, they're still at Mount Sinai. As a matter of fact, they don't leave Mount Sinai till we get to Numbers 10. So that's a long time that they're going to stay there. All right? So now we're familiar with the idea of the Sabbath of days, right? What's the Sabbath of days? 7th day, okay? One out of every 7 days is to be dedicated to God and His rest, right? Now remember we talked about it before. We celebrate it as Sunday. But God doesn't, it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily have to do it on Sunday. But you can, your Sabbath could be Thursday. That's the day that you rest, that you dedicate to God. But you have to give that one day, all right? But this describes a Sabbath of years for the land. So where the land receives rest 1 year out of 7 years. For Israel to truly, truly trust in God. See, they had to trust God to provide enough that 6 years that they were doing it to carry them over the 7th year that they didn't, that they gave the land rest. Yes.
Was this year to let the land replenish?
Yeah, to let the land rest, to let the land replenish. Okay? Farmers do that today. They know. You rotate crops. You don't keep planting the same thing over and over and over and over again on the field. You got to let that field rest for at least a year, okay, to rebuild the nutrients and do everything in.
This is funny. I don't know if you've seen the yard. I only got a garden that's about the size of this, maybe less than this. And I put so much fertilizer in there and had so many plants because I wanted tomatoes and cucumbers that it killed my other plants. It's funny. But they were the prettiest things in the world. I had good tomatoes in them. But it killed some of the other ones because I didn't have a place to live. I wanted more than I could make. And that's the way we do sometimes. We put all of our nests in one place. And it overruns, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's what I did my plant. But I laughed all year about that. And I put a whole bunch of fertilizer, y'all, in that. I let it sit all summer, all winter. And it grew good, but it took over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brother Stewart,
Yeah.
do you remember what scripture it is that Paul said, whatever day you choose to be your Sabbath? Do you remember that scripture?
Not right offhand.
Can't remember exactly how it was even said, but Paul was talking about if you choose Tuesday,
Uh-huh.
that is your day
You're right.
for the Sabbath, and went on.
Yeah. You just have to, God just wants you to give one day to him. Is that too much to ask? Just give him one day. That's what he's asking for. Okay? So let's look at this. Verses 3 to 7. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow thy field nor prune thy vineyard. That which groweth of its own accord of thy harvest shalt thou not reap, neither gather the grapes of thy vineyard undressed, or of thy vine undressed. For it is a year of rest unto the Lord, and the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you, for thee, and for thy servant, and for thy maid, and for thy hired servant, and for thy stranger that sojourneth with thee, and for thy cattle, and for the beasts that are in the land, shall all be the increase thereof be meat. Okay? This applies to both grain crops and fruit-bearing crops as well. Israel was to do this as a radical demonstration that the land belonged to God, not to them. All right? Now here's where we get interesting. All right? And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and the space of 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubilee shall that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thy vine undressed. For it is the jubilee. It shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. So, the year of Jubilee was something like a double Sabbath. All right? In other words, the crops were not planted. The land was given a 2-year rest period. And the wonderful liberty of the Jubilee was joyfully announced throughout all the land. Okay? It was they announced all the slaves were free. Every 50 years, all the slaves went free. People were given back. Something had been taken from them. It was given back to them. The trumpet sounded on the Day of Atonement to proclaim Jubilee, and the land received an extra year of rest. It was also a liberation of sorts. Okay? Now, did you understand the weeks part of it? Everybody is kind of looking at me, deer in headlights.
There was like 49 or something.
Yeah. Okay? It's, let me break it down for you. All right? You ready for the graph? Here's the graph. All right. They're years. You have a week of years, which is 7 years. All right? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. All right? Be like 6 days. 6 years. The 7th was a year what they call the Shemitah. The Shemitah was a year of rest. Those 7 years made 1 week. All right? Make sense? Then you went to week 2. You did the same thing over again in week 2. 7 years, 6 years, planted crops, did everything. 7th year, Shemitah. Then you started week 3. You went all the way down through every week until you get to week 7. Now, week 7, you go up to 49. The 49th week, right? The 49th week, that is another Shemitah. But the following one, starting the cycle all over again, That's the Joval. Jubilee. Okay? So the year of Jubilee was another year of rest. Then you would start the weeks all back over again. Okay? Yes?
When you're 7 and by 7, is that where you get to 49? That'd be 7 times 7.
Yes, 7 times 7 is 49. And then you get down to the 50th. That's the Joval. That's the year of Jubilee. And it goes on, and the whole process starts over again. Remember this, because this is important when you start getting into Daniel and the Daniel 70 weeks prophecy. Because Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy goes, instead of the weeks, it's the week of years. Right? So that's, when we get into that, it's Jeremiah, it says that I've assigned 1 day for a year. So, but this is how this is the basis of the foundation of that 70 weeks prophecy comes down to this. And if you understand this, then you can start to understand Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy better. Right? Does this make sense? Any questions about that?
Nope, I don't get it, but.
You don't get it? Okay. Well, no, that's fine. That's fine. Okay?
I'm not good at math.
You don't have to be. You don't have to be. You have 1 week of years, which is 7 years. Okay? So 1 week of years is 7 years. Do everything you want. 6 years. Plant. Do whatever. The garden. All that for 6 years. 7th year, had to rest. Nothing done. You don't plant anything. You don't do anything. You needed to save up enough for that 6 years to last you that 7th year. That's a Shemitah. It's a time of rest. Okay? That's 1 week. Once you complete that, then you start all over again till you get to the 2nd week. You do the same thing again for the 2nd week. Then you do the same thing again. 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. Then when you get to the 7th, you're going down to 49 years. The 49th year is another Shemitah. It's another year of rest. Then you start the whole process all over again. And when you start the whole process over again, you go back over here to the 1st week.
Okay.
That is the Joval. That's the year of Jubilee. That's the 50th year. Another year of rest, and that's when they let everybody go and all the slaves get set free and everything, okay? And then it starts this process all over again. And it does it every 49 years that happens.
They're calling each week,
Huh?
they're calling each
Yeah.
week like 7 years, but within those 7 weeks, there's 49 years within, there's only 7 years within that time frame that they're completely at rest.
Yeah. Is it clear as mud? Got it? All right. Again, that's it. This is something that you really need to understand when you start getting into Daniel's 70 weeks. Okay? Do y'all want to get into Daniel's 70 weeks? No. Some of you go, no.
Eventually, absolutely.
Okay. But this is highly important when you get into Daniel's 70 weeks. All right? Because then we start talking about when the temple was rebuilt, when all of this happens, and it goes down to from the time that it happens, there's 70 weeks until when the temple is rebuilt. There's 69 weeks until Messiah is cut off, and then the 70th week, the 7th week, or the 70th week is the tribulation period. Okay, so, but that's what we'll get into that later on. But try to remember this for when we start getting down to that, because this is the foundation, the basis, everything for Daniel's 70 weeks and for eschatology to begin with. This is a big foundation for it. All right?
Pastor, sorry, go ahead. The thing is, that you hear me preach this a lot, it's being led by the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had this all, was that like a tradition, right?
Yeah.
And they do it over and over again. But everything in that Bible, if you really get to study it, you know, a lot of people that's not in there for the Lord, right, they don't understand it. But it talks about getting in the Spirit. When you get in the Spirit, He will lead you and guide you. It says all truth.
Mhm.
That's what that is. That's all, like all truth. And the easy way I go in that Bible, there's a reason for it. I'm getting that. You know what I mean, Pastor? That's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whenever you call an Israelite a Hebrew, a lot of people don't understand Hebrew was their language.
Hebrew was their language, but they were called the Hebrew children. It is again. You can go ahead and stop the stream if you want to. Again.
Thank you for joining us today. We pray you were blessed by the broadcast. If you have a prayer request or questions about Solid Rock Tabernacle, please visit our website at www.solidrocktabernacle.org. That's www.solidrocktabernacle.org. On behalf of the pastors and congregation here at Solid Rock Tabernacle, we pray you have a blessed week, and we invite you to join us in person or on one of our